Good evening. I'm Diana Bully, and welcome to our live YouTube Q&A. This is where you can ask any questions that you may have about the supportive housing project on Burnett Street in Maple Ridge, and where we're going to answer them live here tonight. If you've seen any of the previous Q&As, such as the Let's Talk Housing in Nanaimo, you'll know how easy it is to take part in tonight's presentation. Just type your question into the bottom of your screen where it says, "We want to hear from you," and hit submit. Those questions will come to us, and you can also see other questions people may have asked presented on the screen. Your question will be read out to our panel momentarily and answered directly here on camera. And if we aren't able to get to your question tonight, they'll be answered online tomorrow. Before we get started, I'd like to do a round of introductions, introduce you to our project panel. Start with you, Daryl.
I'm Daryl Burnham. I'm the CEO of Coast Mental Health, and we're very pleased to be the operator for the Burnett Street site. And we currently operate Royal Crescent and Alouette Heights in Maple Ridge and about 45 sites across the Lower Mainland.
Good evening. My name is Dominic Flanagan. I'm the Executive Director for Strategic Initiatives and I focus on homelessness at BC Housing. I also have lead responsibility for this particular program in Maple Ridge.
Hi, my name is Dr. Ingrid Tyler. I'm a medical health officer at Fraser Health, and I work with a population of Maple Ridge on mental wellness and healthy living.
Hi, my name is Naomi Brennemeyer. I'm the Director of Regional Development for the Lower Mainland at BC Housing. My role in this project was starting with the site acquisition. I oversee the design and all the way through to the end of construction for this project on Burnett.
Hi, I'm Dan Kipper. I'm a Director in the Mental Health and Substance Use Program in Fraser Health, and I have responsibility for mental health and substance use services in Maple Ridge, both community and acute services.
Great, thank you, panelists. In addition to our panelists this evening, we also have Anna Calva. She's the Manager of Digital Engagement with BC Housing, and she's going to be forwarding all your questions to me so that I can read them out to our panelists as we go through the discussion. Before we get going on the questions and answers, though, Daryl, could you provide us with a bit of an overview of Coast Mental Health and the background that you're bringing to the project and some of your other experiences?
Sure, thank you. Coast has been around since 1972, and it started its first housing project in 1973. And very quickly we realized our mission is to support recovery of persons with mental illness. And we realized in 1973 when we opened our first housing project that a foundation for recovery starts with a home. That if you don't have a place to live that has supports, to actually move forward in your life is absolutely impossible. So since then, we've been pursuing a mission of developing housing resources that provides a safe setting sets the stage for persons' recovery from mental illness. And as I mentioned earlier, we have about 45 sites across the Lower Mainland at the moment. So we're very pleased to be in Maple Ridge. We think it's a community that this project will really be a benefit to.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about the project itself and what kind of housing is going to be provided?
The project itself is going to be a 51-unit rapid response to homelessness modular project. And if people are familiar with Royal Crescent, it's a different project than that. It's actually ones that have been developed and operating throughout the Lower Mainland, a lot of them in Vancouver, including one that Coast operates in Little Mountain, which is a bit smaller project, 46 units. But they're made specifically for this purpose. So it's not a recycled project for some other purpose. It's made for housing people who are been homeless at risk and need the support. So the units themselves are about 320 square feet. They're actually quite nice little studios, fully self-contained. There's a washroom, a small kitchen, sitting area, plus a bed. So they're not opulent by any means, but they're very nice. There's an amenity space in the building. There's going to be a medical office for nursing and in-reach services through Fraser Health. And there's also a meal program. So there's a commercial kitchen, dining area, TV room, and other things for the tenants. A free laundry service, of course, for tenants. So it's actually very well designed. And we actually found the one in Little Mountain to be really nice to operate. The tenants have settled in very nicely. And has a really reasonably good degree of security as well in terms of the design of the building. So it's been actually working very well since we opened in October.
Wonderful. Thank you for that overview. That helps provide some context to folks who are watching from their homes. So we're going to start moving into the questions that we've received from you. They're coming up online fast and furiously. And don't forget that you can continue to send your questions all the way through this evening. Just type in where we want to hear from you and press submit. So let's go forward with our first one. So our first question comes from our first, oh, I can't see your name. So when are the in-person sessions for Maple Ridge scheduled? Thank you.
I'll start with that one. So
Sure.
the BC Housing will be organising the in-person sessions in the month of May. And so those sessions will be going on our website, but hopefully by the end of this week. And so do keep on checking on our website, but those information sessions will be happening in May.
Great. For those who reside at Anita Place but do not want to move into the Brunette Street location, what are your plans to house them?
So what BC Housing is doing in Maple Ridge is providing a range of housing options. So as people are aware, we started the Royal Crescent site 6 months ago with the Coast. And I think it's important to realize that the Royal Crescent site, of those 53 units, approximately 50% came directly from the camp. The rest either came from the Salvation Army shelter or were filled by people living on the streets of Maple Ridge. We are in dialogue with people at the camp, and what we're hearing at the moment is that everybody who is homeless at the camp wants somewhere to live. So we are in Maple Ridge. We have the modular housing, but we also, people may be aware, we have what's called our scattered units, our rental subsidy program. And this allows people to find housing in the rental market. And that's operated by non-profits such as Alouette Addictions and Rain City, and as well as Coast as well. So for people who are homeless, not just at Anita Place, but whether they're homeless in Anita Place or at the Salvation Army shelter, we're providing a range of housing options. And I think that's really important, that the housing options we provide are very much targeted to address what the individual may need.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from a Maple Ridge resident. What is the list of supports for mental health and substance abuse issues that are readily available to those staying at your building? So I think that's probably for you, Daryl.
So while myself and Dan probably, we work with our clients on a case management point of view. So we have a key worker working with each resident, and they'll do an assessment and a self-assessment for the clients we use a model called Recovery Star. And so people would determine which area of recovery they're needing. If there's a need for mental health assessment or primary health assessments, that's where we would work with the mental health team, local Fraser Health team, or Fraser Health Public Health to actually do an assessment of what that person will need. And that may be part of that recovery plan, to work on mental health goals or primary health goals, addiction goals, or employment, or actually getting involved in volunteer activities. Anything like that would be part of that planning process for an individual with addictions. Or with mental illness. We also anticipate that we'll be able to manage medication support if people need that. So if people need daily medication for either a primary health issue or a mental health issue, we'll be able to manage that. And we certainly do that already at Royal Crescent, and we expect that we'll be doing that at Brunette Street.
Okay.
And could I just add to that?
Sure.
So we'll also be working quite closely with Coast and have our own outreach support worker providing liaison support to the Coast staff, both in terms of doing mental health assessments as well as referring to other resources in the community. We also have a nurse practitioner who will be going in a little bit each week. We haven't sorted that out yet, but doing primary care. There's, as Daryl was saying, there's a clinic there where he can do assessments and treatment. So we will be doing some in-reach, as well as encouraging individuals to access service out in the community as well, not just sort of in-house. So, yeah.
Thank you. So we have another question coming from Dee, and it says, my understanding is you are only funding low barrier supportive housing for the street entrenched homeless at this time. Is this correct? Are there any other options? What happens if someone wants to go to detox? Is there any second stage housing for them to go to, and do you fund it? So let's start with the first question. Only funding low barrier supportive housing for the street entrenched homeless at this time. We may have touched on this a bit. But.
So the housing that we are funding is really focused on bringing people who are homeless inside. And so the housing model we are following is a model that people have, I know from some of the discussions online, people have heard about it, called Housing First. And what that model provides is, it doesn't say, it provides housing first, not housing last. So the expectation is not that you have to be, go through a number of programs or housing ready. It actually provides housing first. And I think the key here is that the model is called housing first, not, as people often say in the field, housing only. So it's that combination of supports that really start to make a difference, because the housing, as Darryl just touched on, the housing acts as the platform for the support services, which really provide the opportunity to transform and start to turn people's lives around.
Great.
Actually, I just want to add to that. So in addition to housing, the Housing First model, BC Housing's also launched several other programs this February with the last budget. So there was the Community Housing Fund, which has a target of 14,000 units over the next 10 years. There was the Supportive Housing Fund, which this project will be funded under. There was the Indigenous Housing Fund. So there were competitive proposal calls under the Indigenous Housing Fund and the Community Housing Fund. And there is a project that was selected. The only project submitted to the Community Housing Fund was selected from Maple Ridge, and that's moving forward in partnership with Cythera Transition House, which is a reputable, excellent provider that is in Maple Ridge, as well as there was a previous, under the last government, there was another proposal call that was also Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows, which is 94 units, and that is a range of some at deep subsidy and some that are just basic affordable rental for families and seniors, and that's going to be breaking ground in the next 3 months.
Could I just add, just around the question around the detox, I know that came up.
Sure, yes, let's go there.
So in partnership with Coast, certainly we would be working quite closely with them and their staff on site there to identify anyone who may need either detox services or any type of substance use services. So we would help facilitate some of those referrals to our own service, certainly in Surrey. There's a withdrawal management program there, detox program there, as well as our service providers in Maple Ridge, Alouette Addictions. We work in very close partnership with them, and you know, they're quite well known in the community. So there's lots of resources as individuals are in housing to be able to assess that, to make decisions. What's the best thing that's required for them? Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's just also, and maybe say add a couple more points, that it's not either housing or treatment. What the housing does is combine both of them together.
Right.
And so, as Coast know well over the 40+ years, the housing provides that opportunity for people to either get community-based treatment services that Dan just talked about, or maybe go into a residential program. And I think the other thing the question talked about is that I just also want to make it clear that BC Housing also does fund what you may call abstinence-based programming. So we do fund programs like through Hope for Freedom, for example. We provide capital and operating dollars. Salvation Army, I can think of a program called Grace Mansions in the city of Vancouver, which is a traditional abstinence-based model. And in fact, we started dialogue with the city of Maple Ridge to talk about what the Made in Maple Ridge model may look like in terms of providing a more very kind of abstinence and recovery-based focused. So that dialogue, that Made in Maple Ridge model, that's still on the table as well. What we've got to address in the immediate is the people who are still street and sheltered homeless.
Okay, and I think I'd just like to add one point that there is no single clinical treatment plan or clinical treatment model that's going to work for everyone. So in hearing all the various options that are available in the community for treatment and for housing, I think it's that combination of options that's really important to be able to help everyone and meet them where they're at so that they can start their journey of recovery.
Great, thanks, Dr. Tyler. Okay, let's move on to our next question. Will every resident be subject to a mental health, physical health, and substance abuse exam upon arrival? And will supports be put in place right away?
Well, I'll answer.
Yeah.
When we do an intake, we will do we'll have some information through the application process. BC Housing and our staff will do what we call a vulnerability assessment test, which will look at the general vulnerability and needs of each of the residents that are coming in. And that should give us some insight, and we'll take a bit of a history of the individual. We will have a nurse in the program to actually look at medical issues, and so we can look at what medical issues people may have. And frankly, if you've been homeless for a while, you're coming with medical issues, and most of them have been poorly attended to. So that will be a very important issue, and will also get us insight into any mental illness that they may know of or we think they may have. And so that's where we would work with Fraser Health to make sure that there's a relationship there, so when people are ready to actually address those issues, that they had the resource available.
Great.
And I just also want to echo, I think that's a really good question, because it speaks to the individualized nature of the support model that COAST will be putting in place. Because often when you hear about, one of the criticisms sometimes about supportive housing, that it's a one-size-fits-all. I would argue that actually the housing model that we're talking about is the polar opposite of that. This is a very tailored and targeted approach because it recognizes that there's no single path into homelessness, and so there's no single path out of it as well. So we have a very, and COAST provides a very tailored and targeted approach which addresses individual needs.
Could I just add, just picking up what Darryl was saying around the connection and liaison with Fraser Health, is that some of the individuals in the housing may even be on our ICM team. So that's the intensive case management team. So they provide support and service to individuals living in the community and potentially in the new housing. And with that team comes a psychiatrist, nurse practitioner, case managers, so there's a lot of additional resources that could be supporting individuals in the modular housing as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. And those would go along with them into the housing?
By all means,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we are very excited, says Lisa, to hear about the new housing coming into our community and believe that housing is the start to healing. We are wondering what supports besides health supports will be offered to the new tenants. Thank you. So besides health supports, what kinds of things would you typically offer to your tenants?
What would we do, again, through this planning process with folks who are they interested in volunteering? We'll have a community garden there, so we'll actually, if people are interested in gardening, we'll be looking at what actually brings them joy in their life and try to tap into that. So rather than push people to do things that they don't want to do, find what they love and actually encourage that. Encourage them to build on strength, because everyone, no matter whatever going on in their life, they'll have a whole array of strengths, and then finding ways to enable that and move the people forward in that. And then it could be music, it could be whatever, it could be a walking group or hiking group. All those types of things are really useful to build a full life, because really what we're hoping to do is allow people to move back into being full citizens in their community. And part of that is actually enjoying the resources. So if that's going to the community center, or if that's getting involved with clubs in the community, all that would be wonderful. So, but we won't know until we actually have those conversations.
Right, great, okay, thank you. So a resident asks, what is the expected time each resident will be living in the building? How will you ensure those who are waiting for housing are not on the streets on a wait list? And will the original residents stay for long periods of time?
I'll answer. Our experience is that with these types of housing is that you measure it in a matter of years.
Okay.
And so I expect the minimum stay would be a year for most people. And then after they sorted things out, they'll move forward. It may be faster. It could be 6 months for some who really have a goal and we're able to find a way to find housing for them. but it may be 2 or 3 years too. But we don't artificially put a time limit on this. It actually creates a crisis for someone, even if we were a partner in the At Home Chez Soi program, which is the National Homelessness Program. And it was a 2-year operational plan. People were worried 1 year before. They knew the program was going to end. They were worried a year out, and it caused a crisis. So we would rather not do that. We'd rather actually have a plan for where the next step is. And it'll be one of our early conversations is that you're here now, where do you want to be? And what do we need to do to help you get to that spot?
Great.
And I just also want to say about the wait list that the person asked about, Diana, is that BC Housing is working with the community partners like Coast, Fraser Health, Allied Addiction and Salvation Army, and we've developed what's called a coordinated access table. So we are trying to make sure there isn't a wait list and there's a single point of entry into supportive housing in Maple Ridge.
And I think what's really critical is the investment in additional housing for the community of Maple Ridge, and so that once people are stabilized at the Burnett site or at Royal Crescent, that they actually have somewhere to move to. So this first phase is to address this immediate need for those who are homeless, but also to continue to build more affordable housing in Maple Ridge, I think is critical. And that's the conversations that we can continue to have with the City of Maple Ridge and other residents. So we do own Royal Crescent, we do own Burnett, and we do have an ongoing discussion on the Lougheed site, which was purchased several years ago, that is owned by the City of Maple Ridge. So we have existing sites in the community that we can build on. Once we stabilize these people's lives, we can continue to build and invest in Maple Ridge to be able to provide opportunities for people to transition out.
See, our ultimate goal is to make sure that this is the last time they'll ever be homeless in their life. So we want to create enough foundation for them that when they move their next step, they won't have to worry about ever being homeless again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Uma Sharda. How is a treatment center different than the supportive modular housing the province is building? Could you speak to, do those living there have a safe injection site? Maybe we'll just start with that, excuse me, and take it from there. So how is this different from a treatment center?
Well, I think Fraser Health may want to chime in as well here. I mean, it's important, as I said before, that this is seen as both housing and treatment and health combined all in one spot. And as I say, housing is the platform for those support services, for that access into community-based services. So that would include treatment. This housing does not exclude people who are using drugs, because we feel that's very important, because otherwise, if you exclude people who are using drugs, then they remain on the street. And there's significant evidence to show now that the longer people remain on the street homeless, then they have very kind of complex health needs. And besides the human cost, it's a significant cost for first responders, for the ER system, etc. So again, it's about the combination of housing, which will provide access to both treatment and connection to other community-based programs.
Okay.
And could I just add, so to differentiate treatment, really an individual may go into one of our substance use treatment facilities, so Maple Ridge Treatment Center, Kinghaven, some of our support recovery homes, where there's actually designed programs to support them in the recovery.
Right.
I think the modular housing is, one could consider it more as housing, but they would have supports on site and there could be programming on site. So it's really a differentiation of treatment and housing. And I think I heard there, is this going to be a safe injection site? And my understanding is no, it's not.
No.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And so the follow-up question there is, are residents allowed to use illegal drugs on site, whether indoors or outside within the property limits of the modular housing?
Our expectation that people, if they use it inside the building and not outside in the public. We will have Sharps containers, safe way for people to do that. But we want to encourage that people do not do that in the community. They actually do it in a safe way, so that if there is an overdose, that people can respond and hopefully respond appropriately to that. And again, as mentioned, if they're motivated to move into treatment, then that's when we look at detox. That's when we look at the treatment stream as soon as possible.
Okay, and then finally, the last part of this question is, how many people are on the caseload for any healthcare professional who is providing services at the modular housing?
I'll have to, you mean for our staff? Like for the co-staff, I'd say we probably have a caseload of 8 per resident. And plus we'll have a nurse overseeing all of them, but really, and a manager for the program that will oversee all the residents. But each key worker would have 8 to 10 people on their on their portfolio.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, next question. It's coming from a resident. It says, will those who came from other municipalities be directed to second stage housing there? Not sure what's meant exactly by second stage housing. Perhaps you have some insights, but will those who came from other municipalities be directed, I suppose, back to those municipalities?
So I will say, I mean, when we opened up Royal Crescent, all those people who moved into Royal Crescent were long-term Maple Ridge. What we see in Maple Ridge is what we see in many other communities, that there's a homeless population who are long-term there. So the priority for this housing will be for people who are homeless and have been long-term homeless in Maple Ridge.
Okay, thank you. How many homeless people go back to being homeless and go on to recovery / a permanent home in a 5-year-long temporary supportive modular housing that is like the one planned to be built for Maple Ridge?
I'm sorry, what's
So they're asking how many of the people who are homeless go back to being homeless versus going on to recovery / permanent housing over a 5-year-long temporary supportive modular housing project like this one?
In our experience, and we've been in housing for a long time, once people are adequately housed, they don't go back. So evictions happen. And actually, from our experience with the at-home Chez Soi program, which we operate with 100 people in a scattered model, some people were evicted, but we actually rehoused them. And we help people house. And sometimes it took 3 evictions before someone settled in a place and moved forward. So evictions are rare, but it does happen. But I would say well over 90% are stably housed, and then we'll go from there.
I also want to say that I think it's important to realize that BC Housing, I mean, we've been providing supportive housing now for well over 10 years. And one of the things we closely monitor is housing stability. So that's an outcome that we track. And as Daryl says, our housing stability figures are very high. But when people do leave supportive housing, if they do, say, lose their housing for whatever reason, one of the things that we've really started also is build in a rapid rehousing model. So we do our best to try and follow people if they do lose their housing as well. But one of the key indicators that we do measure is housing stability.
Yeah. Great.
And I think one of the benefits of having support services on site and in-reach services, let's say for mental health and substance use, is that we can provide some consistent treatment. And so an individual may continue to get well, which provides them with stable housing versus being homeless and not being able to follow up with appointments or not being able to be following any treatment regime. So really this model of housing with the wraparound supports is really beneficial, which provides a stable housing.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, all right. Next up, we have a question from a resident asking, will the residents be expected to follow curfews? If these rooms will be passed on to new people over time, do the residents have to follow cleanliness rules? And finally, will they be subject to room searches?
Just on the room search, we do suite inspections. We'll probably do monthly suite inspections at the start.
Yep.
And just to give a sense of what's going on, we wouldn't necessarily do searches unless there was a reason to do a search, or we had a right to do a search. But really, we're looking how well the unit is taken care of and whether or not people have personal care skills. It's one of the things we'll be looking for, how well people manage. There's sometimes a tendency for people to hoard things, and so that will be one thing, because that can create a safety issue, a fire hazard, or just a trip hazard. So we'll be looking at those as well.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of a curfew?
These are residences. People are able to come and go, so we don't have a curfew per se, but we certainly have a monitored door to make sure that it's for residents or guests of the residents only. And just like you or I don't have curfews, the residents wouldn't have curfews either.
Great, thank you. All right, our next question is from a resident. What are the building rules in relation to noise and light bylaws? Will the neighbors to this new building have peace and quiet, or will they hear shouting at all hours?
I'll answer that as well.
Sure.
So we've had concerns at Royal Crescent with some shouting, and so what we've done is actually install some lights, some better cameras, and just recently we've hired a security service to actually pump up patrol outside overnight. So we expect that will be starting from day one at Burnett Street, so that if there's any disturbance outside after hours, we will either tend to it, the security guard would tend to it, and if necessary, we'll get the RCMP to do that. So it's been a concern at Royal Crescent, particularly in the last month or two since the Anita's camp closed down and reopened tightly. And so we've been trying to tweak it so that we make sure that not only our tenants have quiet enjoyment of their unit, which is every right of a tenant, but that the neighbors do as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, first, what is the timeline for determining who will be the first 51 occupants of the new modular housing? Let's start there. It's a little bit of a long question, so.
Okay, so we've already started some dialogue with our community partners. So I mentioned before that coordinated access table. So that coordinated access table, which is all the community partners, including Fraser Health, will kind of come together and start to prioritize people for the site in Burnett. And what that priority, one of the key principles of that priority is what we've touched on before, is making sure that everyone who moves into Burnett is matched to the appropriate support. So that would be a key principle. And also the priority will be people who are either at Anita Place Camp or camping elsewhere in Maple Ridge or in the shelter, the Salvation Army shelter in Maple Ridge.
Great, and so a follow-up question to that is, if once you have compiled this list that you recognize the majority of Anita Place occupants still refuse housing and wish to continue to live on the street, will you then agree to sit with our mayor to come up with a workable solution to this problem? Thank you for taking the time to address my questions.
So, we keep on hearing this question about that people are refusing to move in, and I think, I can't speak for people, obviously, who when they get a kind of camera shoved in front of them who may be homeless and say, I'm not going to move in here. I think there's a number of issues I think this raises, though, and I think that's one of the key issues it raises, I think, is that what we're trying to do at BC Housing is, as we said at the start, is try and make sure we have a spectrum of housing options. So we recognize that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all model. So we want to have a spectrum of housing options for people who are homeless. As I say, what people may say publicly, they may say privately to somebody else. I mean, we didn't find it that hard to take, as I said, at Royal Crescent, 50% of that population came from Anita Place. The other issue is that I think it's just also something to think about, that the longer people stay on the street, sometimes the more difficult it is to engage with our population. So it's often about very important for relationships to be built up over time. And that's whether it's with like Coast Outreach Team, the Salvation Army shelter. It's about those trust-based relationships. And that's why the work is starting now, to start to engage with people, whether it's in Anita Place or within the shelter, to make sure people who are really vulnerable can be brought inside.
I also think that because this is actually going to be delivered in a very tight timeline, people will actually see that the supportive housing is being built and that it will be operational and open before the next winter season. And so I think it's very easy on a conceptual level to say that perhaps people might not want to move in, but once they actually see the housing being built. And so because we have a very concrete timeline for its delivery, that people can actually see it going up, it'll go up very quickly, that's also going to change the conversation, and that people will be, are actually convinced that they might be able to have a home now in Maple Ridge.
Great. Okay.
And I also think, and Naomi can talk more about this, but I think that the modular housing we put in Burnett I think we cannot emphasize enough. It's what's the language now? I mean, it's purpose-built modular housing, isn't it? So it's very purpose-built modular housing, and it will look really good.
Excellent. Great. Okay, so another question from Andrea asking, will the drug use be limited to inside their units? Is there a plan to keep neighboring houses and elementary school children safe from exposure to this? And will staff be checking that individuals are not leaving the premises with drugs?
Risk. And actually for tenants, that's a very powerful lever. That's a very good point. That someone's worried about things that has to do with our site, hopefully they can phone us and we can deal with it.
Okay.
And if it is one of our tenants, then we can deal with it in terms of a tenancy issue. If it's not, then of course it could be an issue for the RCMP.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in on that point? I think I need to mention for anyone who's listening out there this evening that actually using drugs alone behind a closed door by yourself is a significant risk factor for overdose. And as we know, we're also dealing with an opioid overdose crisis in this province. I need to strongly suggest to anybody that if you do use opioids, or if you know of a family member or loved one or a friend or anyone who uses opioids, please do not encourage them to use alone, because that's a known risk factor for death in opioid overdose. We strongly encourage people to let somebody who cares about them know that they're going to use. So if an overdose occurs, which it could be considered to be highly probable with the current poison drug supply, that somebody can come help, call 911 or administer naloxone if an overdose occurs.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is how many staff will be on site at any given time, and what are their responsibilities?
So we'll have a minimum of 2 staff at any one time, so no overnight, plus we'll have security. So likely the minimum we'll see of any staff would be 3. We'll have a cook on site, we'll have a building operator, someone who'll keep the grounds in the building clean, and a manager as well, and a nurse 7 days a week. So we'll have, again, there may be some shifts that are less than 3 persons on site, or at the minimum of 3 persons on site, but most of the time before, or even 5 at times. And then with in-reach services, there may be others as well. So we may actually have Fraser Health staff or other staff come in or to work on a program.
Attend the building. Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Our next question is from a resident asking, what will be done to make sure the residents keep the area clean, such as not leaving needles on the ground? Will this building have sharps boxes on their premise to dispose of needles safely? If needles are handed out, will the residents be held accountable to properly dispose of them?
It's a good question. We had this question with one of our very first meetings at Royal Crescent, with our Community Advisory Committee, and we quickly established a 5-person clean team of residents who went policed the neighborhood. So not just the grounds of Royal Crescent, but the neighborhood. And we've actually expanded the zone that they go around and to pick up any garbage. And if they were to see needles, they could actually put them safely into a sharps container. So this would be what we would bring to Brunette Street to make sure that there's a whole area that are policed by residents. And actually, it's a way of encouraging people to be appropriate, you know, just to take care of their community. And again, our experience with housing for the last 40 some odd years is that people are very proud of their housing and want to keep it nice, because for many, it may be the best thing they've lived in memory.
Right. Okay.
Can
go
I
ahead.
Again? Yeah. My experience has been with several housing sites that this clean team model that you've just described is very effective, and that generally there is not a lot of needle litter in the area. Sweeps are done regularly. But I wanted to point out that if anybody does find an inappropriately discarded needle that they're concerned about, Fraser Health does provide a phone number that you can call to have that needle properly disposed of, as well as disposal instructions online on our website also. So there's a number of services that Fraser Health contracts out to make sure that the communities are as clean as possible of any inappropriate needle discards.
Great, thank you. Daryl, I just wanted to touch back on something you've mentioned a couple of times, which is the Community Advisory Committee,
Yeah.
and you said there would be one for this building.
Yes.
Do you want to just give a bit of an overview of what that?
Sure,
what that
it's
function
made up, basically it's exactly what it says. It's a group of community members and key stakeholders, including Fraser Health, BC Housing, the RCMP, the City of Maple Ridge. We sit down, and with Royal Crescent, we sit down every second month. This one will probably start on a monthly basis to just see how it's going and what are the issues from the community, and then we can share what we see and what we're doing, and so there's no surprises. If there are issues, we can course correct. And for example, Royal Crescent, we saw the litter in the streets, so we have a clean team. We saw some noise, and now we've increased security and lighting and other things so that we can course correct. We've done this for facilities since 2011 in Surrey and Dunbar and other communities to just make sure we navigate the process of starting a new program in the community very well. Most of the community advisory committees last 2 to 4 years, and then they kind of decide, well, we don't need to meet anymore because there's nothing going on. We meet at Dunbar. We've been meeting for the last 10 years, but I think it's just because people enjoy meeting. So, and we continue to meet and talk, and really the community advisory committees segued there into what can we do to help the tenants and how they move forward in their life.
Okay, great, thanks for that overview. Okay, I'm told this is our last question, then we're going to take a quick break, 5-minute break. So let's go to Shadow, who's asking, why is BC Housing against an abstinence-based temporary housing model for Burnett? People that have completed a recovery program or detox cannot be in an environment with active drug use. The continued success for these individuals requires a drug-free living space. Maple Ridge currently has a minimum of 3 places for active drug users to find temporary shelter, but nothing for those that are clean.
Thank you for the question. I think we touched on this before, that I mean, BC Housing actually does provide a range and actually fund abstinence-based programming. What we have at the moment, though, in Maple Ridge is an urgent need to address the homeless challenges in Maple Ridge in this moment. And that's why we are providing the type of housing model. And again, as we said previously, it's not a separation from housing just 4 walls and a roof and nothing happening. This is the type of housing where people can and do get clean. I mean, Darryl can talk more about this, but this is the type of housing where people do and get clean and can either do that through a community-based program or go away to a place like Kinghaven or a support recovery program. So it's, I think it's really important that we provide both a range of options, but I'd also come back to the point that we're prepared to sit down, and we are sitting down with Maple Ridge and saying, okay, what does a Made in Maple Ridge model look like in terms of a recovery and abstinence-based model? What does that look like for this community as well in the mid and long term? Yep.
Okay.
If I could just add to that too, if someone's recovering from a substance use issue, they have to figure out a way to manage the temptations. There is no such thing as a abstinence-free environment. You're 5 minutes away with dial-a-dope from any kind of drug you want, and you walk out on the street and you have some opportunities. So the person in recovery has to figure out what are their trigger, what do they have to deal with, and actually figure out a way to deal with that in their life. If they're an alcoholic, you don't go into beer halls, but you also, you could phone a taxi to bring the alcohol there. So you have to figure that out. That's part of the recovery process. And you'll expect people to make some slips as they go through it, but they'll learn, and hopefully they'll move forward in their life.
Great, thank you. Okay. So this brings us to our break. We've reached the halfway mark in tonight's YouTube Live Q&A. If you haven't seen your question yet, don't worry. We're going to try to get to it in the second half. We have lots of them coming in, so thank you for those. If you want to keep continuing to add your questions, just type into the We Want to Hear From You box, and don't forget to hit submit, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back to our YouTube live Q&A on supportive housing in Maple Ridge. I'm Diana Bully, and with me I have project partners here as our panelists this evening. We have Daryl Burnham from Coast Mental Health, Dominic Flanagan from BC Housing, Dr. Tyler from Fraser Health, Naomi Brunmeyer from BC Housing, and Dan Kipper from Fraser Health. Right. My apologies, Dan. Okay. Before we go back to the Q&A, Dr. Tyler was suggesting that she could perhaps share some of her reflections on the earlier discussion related to some treatment pieces that have come up this evening. So Dr. Tyler, did you want to share some with our viewers some of your reflections on our discussion so far?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I just, as I was listening to the conversation in the last 45 minutes or so, I was hearing that the word treatment was being used in a lot of different ways. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, well, first of all, homelessness, there's a lot of medical risk factors that may cause a person to be homeless, but there's a lot of negative health outcomes that will result from homelessness. And I think we need to just understand in the context of the conversation that when we talk about treatment, it may be primary care treatment, it may be treatment of chronic disease, we may be supporting individuals who are pregnant, and we may be treating people with mental health and substance use disorders. And having treated individuals with mental health and substance use disorders in the past, I just wanted to clarify for the purposes of the conversation that in some cases you can do that on an outpatient basis, and you can do that in community as a physician, and in other cases people need much more more frequent visits, much more intensive treatment, all the way down to a full residential program. So just in case there was any confusion about what it might be like to treat an individual in their homes, like you or me or a family physician treating a patient with a mental health concern, versus an individual who's being treated much more intensively in a residential treatment. And I think because we call residential treatment in mental health and substance use services exactly that, there could be some confusion about how housing, which of course is residential in its own way, and treatment sometimes go hand in hand and sometimes can be separated on a supportive or outpatient basis. So I did want to make the point that Fraser Health specifically, we have a long-standing collaboration with BC Housing to support people who are homeless or precariously housed across our region and in Maple Ridge. And we're currently providing over $2.5 million to support those who are homeless and precariously housed in Maple Ridge. And that treatment will really be across the spectrum. So we provide mental health assessment and support, we provide substance use counseling, education, and treatment, and we provide individualized health services, many of which we provide in-reach and outreach to ensure that people, whether they're currently on the street, whether they're at Anita Place Camp, or whether they are in any form of housing, that we really support and ensure that they have access to the services that are provided in the community, regardless where they're physically located. So I wanted to make sure that those distinctions, which are quite important, are very clear in the conversation we're having.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Dr. Tyler. We're going to move on to our first question after the break. And remember, you can keep those questions coming in. If you type in, "We want to hear from you," and we'll try to get to them the rest of the evening. So our first question is, in relation to the abstinence-only model, will those that live in your building and know their triggers be supported? If they know the smell of crystal meth smoke triggers them, will you support them in resisting drugs the other tenants are doing? They're not going to a beer hall, like you mentioned before. They are staying in their home, trying not to relapse. So a bit of a follow-up question there.
No, it's a good question. And yes, of course, we would help people. First of all, with smoke and other things, the new modulars are really well ventilated, so that hopefully there is no ingress from smells from other rooms into into the hallways or into common areas. We actually have, because it's supposed to be a smoke-free working environment, we want to make sure our staff are safe and other tenants are safe from that. And of course, one of the things we would work with every tenant is what are your strategies for dealing with whatever thing is a trigger for you. Right. And so it's really important for people to do that. My comment really, and it was just a sad reality that drugs are just way too available in our community. And so one thing in someone's journey of recovery is to figure out how can I protect myself. And using a smoking example, you know, because smoking, nicotine is a very addictive product. How does smokers who are even in the first year of being abstinent from smoking, they're still going to be exposed to that in their environment. So they'll need to figure out within themselves how to make sure they can manage those urges, whether or not they use a treatment like Nicorettes or gum, or just kind of making sure they're not in that smoking environment that creates that problem. So it's the same for other products as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to our next question, again from Andrea. I'm wondering, why is it necessary to have this housing model in this specific location that is right near homes and multiple schools?
Yeah, so I can start with that. So BC Housing actually purchased that site a few years ago, and we bought it up intentionally for supportive housing. So when we were looking at various factors, what we look at is the size of the lot, whether it's flat or not, because a modular solution usually uses a flat site, so a lack of grading. We look at what the official community use plans are, and we actually intentionally want them close to amenities and close to transit. And so Burnett was actually an ideal location when you look at those sorts of factors. So we actually do want to embed housing within residential communities, because we believe that that's the best way for people to move forward with their lives, is to live in residential settings. And so when you live in a community such as Maple Ridge, there is always going to be a school or a daycare or some sort of other community amenity. And so we want our residents to be able to to participate fully in society. And so we actually choose things that are residentially based. Thanks.
And just for Coast's experience, in our 40 some odd years, almost all of our facilities are embedded in residential communities. And as Naomi mentioned, there are schools in the neighborhood, there are daycares, there are public facilities, and by and large, you don't hear a peep. And frankly, most people can drive by our facility, wouldn't know it's there.
And so, yeah, just to echo that, we really want to this supportive housing as part of the integration of for people homeless, because I think it's so often when we're talking about for people who are homeless, we see the population as a distinct and separate population. And you know, it's always important, though we're talking a lot about addictions, to remember there's a range of reasons why people become homeless. That might be related to structural issues around poverty. It may be related to lack of access to affordable rental housing. It could be a traumatic event. It could be a health need around addictions, mental health, but it's often, it's usually a result of a cumulative impact rather than one single cause that causes a person to become homeless. And when we talk about modular housing by schools, I'm just very mindful, because I was involved in some of the, people remember some of the news stories around the Marpole project in Vancouver. Significant community concerns around the Marpole project. That's 78 units of supportive housing on Heather Street in Vancouver, very close to schools. And so far, that housing has worked incredibly well. There's been no concerns. In fact, the high school has been very actively involved in the program. So, yeah, we really want our supportive housing to be part of the community.
If I could say, so sure. We have operate Little Mountain at 37th and Main. Now, our neighbor is a seniors housing project, and literally 10 feet from our modular housing project. And they were very concerned. And so we met with them before, we've been meeting with them continually, and they, about a couple of months ago, they invited our tenants in for a barbecue. And so it helped break down that concern, and the operation has been very smooth. So we hope that the project will work well in the community. We expect it to. And if there are bumps in the road, we'll work it out through our community advisory process.
Great, thank you. All right, our next question comes from a resident. What about stolen goods like shopping carts or bikes that the residents initially arrived without? Will the serial numbers of these bikes be checked with the RCMP for reported theft? will the shopping carts be returned to the stores they came from?
So just for our, we did talk about the crime-free addendum that will, and if we think people are stealing and they need to deal with it through a police matter, we do encourage the police to attend to issues like that. Shopping carts, there should be no need for shopping carts. People can have a place to store their clothes. One of the things you'll see when the residents have been there for a few months is that they'll look different. First of all, they get a meal. They'll get 2 meals a day, a breakfast and a dinner. That they'll have laundry, so they'll have clean clothes. They'll have a place to keep clothes, so they won't have, in a sense, have to tote all their belongings in a cart. So you'll actually see quite a difference in people, just the way they look, in a few months of living in their own suite.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from John. There are people on the street that have very complex mental problems. What is available in-house for them? So we've touched on this a little bit. Does anyone want to just add to what you've talked about so far around
mental health? Yeah, maybe I could comment on that. So part of our work in mental health and substance use will be to provide a liaison worker who could come in reach and work with the nurse on site there. So if there's someone who's been identified as having mental health concerns or mental health issues, certainly our nurse can provide part of the assessment along with the Coast mental health nurse. And because of that linkage, we have a strong connection to our own community mental health center where we have access to psychiatry and other case managers. So really it's a fairly tight ability to assess and then provide treatment following. And as I was mentioning earlier, sometimes it's a matter of getting individual in housing, so then some of those assessments can take place. And so we will work quite closely with Coast around those issues.
The other thing we'll have in the building would be the ability to administer psychiatric medication. So that if people are, like if you're homeless, actually having any kind of medication protocol, whether it's antibiotics or psychiatric medication, is virtually impossible. And so being in their own home, we will have a nurse, we'll have people to be able to administer medications. So that will actually make a big difference for many people who at least have a psychotic type of disorder like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder.
Okay, thank you. All right, are homeless ever sent to assisted living supportive care facilities?
They can be. In our experience, that people may age out of housing and assisted living is more. So normally if they're older. There are some mental health facilities that provide 24/7 care that are deemed to be assisted living. So that's our experience. We actually operate a couple, and I'm sure Fraser Health has several.
Yeah, and again, the linkages with Fraser Health and the home support nursing could provide those assessments and make decisions whether someone needs to be referred to as assisted living. So all of those linkages would be in place.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I think that's a really important point, though, because one thing, and for those people interested in this area, I would encourage them to look at the Metro Vancouver homeless count, which is not done by BC Housing, it's done by Metro Vancouver, funded by the federal government. And what you see increasingly in the Metro Vancouver homeless count is the homeless population who is getting older. And so it really does make sure, this is why we need this kind of model of supportive housing and strong partnerships with Fraser Health, because we are seeing an older population who are being homeless.
Okay, thank you. All right. Our next question is, would the supportive housing in Maple Ridge take homeless with criminal records? Do homeless after housed ever confess to past crimes, and how is that dealt with?
They do, and we could. I think there'd be certainly a part of the vulnerability assessment test where there's any risk assessment, through their record. And sometimes we've had people who've had to deal with because they're housed, they had to deal with their actions, and so they've gone to court and they've been and may have been sentenced or have probation. So that's part of Housing First, is actually providing housing and then sorting through those issues. It may be actually part of our recovery plan with individuals that this is an area of their life, they got to deal with it. And so let's help them deal with it so that they actually go through the court system and whatever that results in.
Great, okay, thank you. All right, for Coast, what is your policy on drug dealers, et cetera, living there?
Again, with the crime-free addendum, we don't want criminal activity on the site. So with drug dealers living there, that pushes that line. It really does. And so it's probably one of the most common, it's one of the issues for eviction if we find someone's causing harm to others in the building.
Right. Okay.
And so this would be something that we would deal with, and if necessary, we would look at an eviction process for that. If necessary, bring the RCMP in, because it really is a criminal matter.
Right.
It's one thing to use it, but the other thing is to sell it.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, I think this is where the strength of the community table starts to come into it, because through the community, through the community coordinated access and assessment table, that's where those issues are often very strongly dealt with. Again, I come to the issue that for people who are homeless in Maple Ridge, they're well known to a lot of the community partners, such as Coast and other community partners in Maple Ridge. So issues about people, dealing or whatever, are dealt with at that table. So I think it really speaks to the need to have a strong coordinated access and assessment process, and making sure it's dealt with a very strong partnership approach about who moves into the building.
Thank you. Our next question is from Tammy. What is your opinion of mandatory treatment for drug users? Maybe I'll put that to Fraser Health, who would like to reflect on that philosophy.
Yeah, well, I guess we all have to look at individuals as individuals, and it really is a matter of choice. I think to mandate someone to do something is very difficult, and I think certainly I work in the mental health field, and under the Mental Health Act we do have an ability, if someone is quite ill, to make decisions against their will. That's just the way the act is. But I think to actually force and mandate someone to take substance use treatment or things like that is very difficult, and I think we really have to respect people's individuals' rights, and if they choose to live a lifestyle that they've chosen, that is really their choice, and we can be there to support them when they need it or ask for it. But a lot of times people will go into treatment or go into recovery and fall off of that and then come back. So it really is quite a cyclical kind of thing.
I just think I want to answer that from the perspective of a physician. So as a physician, we would be the ones that would sign off on these orders to take away an individual's right under certain circumstances, and it's not something that's done lightly. Generally, one might do that if one is posing a risk to themselves or others, and in the context of drug use, it would be a very short-term risk to basically pink slip somebody and force them to remain in hospital. It's not done lightly, and it's not done routinely, and it's something that's highly protected under the law, because taking away an individual's rights is not something that you want to be easy.
And if I could just add, the Mental Health Act doesn't allow you to mandate someone into substance use treatment. So that's just the law. You can't do that. Yeah.
I think just from the perspective from the person who's homeless, again, we come back to the issue is once people are brought inside, it always amazes me, both as a former frontline social worker and now doing this work, how people's kind of life, and Dad will touch on this, starts to get transformed from very early on, because just by being housed and having their own home and having their ability to close that door behind you gives that sense of stability, and they have that opportunity to think, okay, what comes next for me? And I'm always reminded of this because I was at the Anita Place camp about a year or 18 months ago, and someone there, and he was quite a high-profile person there, and we were talking a bit about choice and drug use and whatever, and his comment has really stayed with me, and he said, it's really hard to make a positive change in your life when you're living in a tent. And that's kind of really stayed with me, because it is hard to make a positive choice when you just got your tent and your whole day is on about survival. And that's where, again, it speaks to the need for about how housing and having your own home can make a real difference.
Thank you. Okay, our next question is, says, a few years ago, we had a safe place for kids ages 13 to 18 to go when they were thrown out of their homes due to family conflict or other circumstances. The Iron Horse Safe House provided 5 emergency beds for kids to stay for up to 30 days while they put a plan together or were repatriated with their families. Unfortunately, it closed when federal operating funding dried up. It is a critical resource and yet not discussed when we talk about the need for housing. These kids are at great risk of becoming street entrenched if not given someplace safe to go. We recorded approximately 20 kids living rough or couch surfing during the last homeless count. Can this please be addressed in this dialogue?
Yeah, well, actually, BC Housing, in partnership with the City of Maple Ridge, actually did replace the Iron Horse Youth Safe House. The house was actually was owned by the City of Maple Ridge of the original one. So while the federal funding dried up, the building wasn't actually structurally sound, and so we actually had to relocate it. So BC Housing purchased a house, renovated it, and made it up to licensing standards to allow for youth to live there. So we don't publish the location of it to protect the identity of those children. So there are 6 youth that are within those ages from 13 to 18 that live there. In addition to that, BC Housing actually is funding 10 beds on Katzie First Nation. So they came in under the Indigenous Housing Fund, and the intent of that program is to actually house Indigenous youth that are aging out of care, and they're bringing back their members back to the nation land. So that's a very exciting partnership that we're interested in. And in addition to that, this provincial government has said that housing youth is a priority. So under this last provincial budget announcement, where we have the Supportive Housing Fund, we're looking at various opportunities within communities in the Fraser Valley, particularly to look for opportunities to provide youth housing, which hasn't been part of our mandate previously.
And if I could just add that one of the, we're dealing with homelessness here, but if you want to prevent homelessness, you have to look at where are people coming.
Yeah,
and a lot of people a lot of young people aging out of care. That's a high participation in homelessness. And so we want to stop that, and I think these are really good initiatives. I know in Maple Ridge, the Community Services Council is developing a Foundry Youth Support Site, again, hopefully to prevent the wheels from falling off for young people who are, from 14 to 24.
Okay, thank you. Okay, our next question says, will this project community build be for a diverse population, seniors, single parents, and addictions and mental health, of course? How many apartments will be available to help the current population in Maple Ridge? I'm thrilled this is finally being addressed here. It's not acceptable to keep the standard we have with people struggling to live, being homeless. Thank you. And that's from Jacqueline. So will it be built for a diverse population, seniors, single parents?
There'll be no families. These are single units, so there wouldn't be any families in there, but it could be someone who's 20, it could be someone who's 65 or 70. Okay. So it'll be that kind of range. Really depends on the needs and the appropriateness of their area. We wanted to cast as broad a net as possible. That makes sense. And
and the housing is actually designed to have accessible units on the ground floor.
Oh, yeah.
So because there's no elevator in the building, it's 3 stories, but the ground floor does have accessible units. And so we'll be able to accommodate people that have mobility challenges.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Kay. What qualifications will the staff have that will be on site, such as qualified healthcare like nurses, counselors, or mental health, etc.?
So we will have a registered nurse on site, so 7 days a week. We're very happy with that. We'll have a manager on site. But the average worker would be what we call a mental health worker. That's this coast language, tenant support worker, maybe others. Normally they'll have a degree from a university or a college. Could have a social work degree. It's quite eclectic. We've in Royal Crescent, we have some with Aboriginal heritage. We want people who can actually reach to and support that relationship between the primary worker and the tenant is really important. So we want folks who have the skills and ability to do that in an effective way, but also work effectively as a team as well. And of course, we'll augment their skills with first aid training, with crisis intervention skills to be able to diffuse situations, and all our staff would have naloxone training so that if they had an emergency, they'd be able to respond to that as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question is from Lincoln. I am in support of the Burnett Street project, absolutely necessary and well located. However, I am concerned about it being temporary. This allows for quick construction, but what is the lifespan of the modular units? And will there be a permanent solution in a timely fashion?
Yeah, so the only part of the structure that's actually temporary is the foundation that we're putting it on. So the actual modulars, they should be able to last for about 35 to 40 years. So they are intended to be able to be relocated to another location in the future. And so it is constructed in a way that allows for it to be taken back off the foundation and moved somewhere else. And so we've been in ongoing dialogue with the City of Maple Ridge for a permanent solution. And so we're still actively engaged in that conversation with them to find a location for a permanent supportive housing project.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next question is from Tammy. If occupants of Anita Place who are offered housing refuse housing and insist on setting up tents, can they then be charged for trespassing? Many say they will continue to live on the streets. How will you respond if this happens?
Well, I think that's some of that question, I have to be honest, is a question for the City of Maple Ridge around how they respond if people start to camp out in parks. We're very aware of some of the issues and needs in Maple Ridge. And just to give you an idea from a shelter perspective, the mainstream kind of shelter program operated, as people know, by the Salvation Army in Lougheed, that every night has close to 60 people in that shelter. Since the city have taken over the supervision of the Anita Place site, there's a low number of people at that site because there's the city have instigated a registration process and they don't allow any guests to the site. But as also people are aware, we have also kept the Salvation Army operating what used to be the mattress store on Lougheed. And over the weekend, that had over 35 to 40 people inside each of on a Saturday and a Sunday. So in terms of just in shelter beds alone, we're talking about up to 100 people every night in a shelter bed. So that speaks to some of the issues and need. And of course, that's not counting the people who are street homeless. And you know, we do share the concerns about camping in parks and those kind of issues. That's why we've invested in the City of Maple Ridge in outreach teams with groups like Alouette Addictions and with Coast and Rain City, so they can work with local bylaw and start to engage with people who may be camping in parks or down by the river or by the railway lands.
Thank you. Our next question is from Carlo Vica. Will there be security 24/7 around the perimeter?
Our anticipation is that there'll be 8 hours of security overnight. So from right now it's 10 to 6 in the morning. And we'll assess that if that's sufficient. We will have staff on site 24/7, 2 staff on, and they'll be monitoring issues. We do have a camera system set up, and the cameras not only look in the building, but also do the perimeter as well. So if staff see something through their cameras that of concern, they can actually either phone the RCMP or intervene themselves if they feel that's appropriate. So that's what we're starting with, and we'll just see how that works. We expect it to be fine.
Great, thank you.
And that's where the Community Advisory Council becomes a really good sounding board for what's going on in the community, because as Darrell was saying, on that Community Advisory Council is the RCMP, the neighbours, the local businesses. So that acts as a really good sounding board for what's going on the ground.
Okay. Our next question is, how often will the individuals staying in this building be checked on during their stay?
We do wellness checks. I think our minimum wellness check for people, just to make sure everything's going well, is 48 hours.
Okay.
So that would be the absolute minimum time that we would be looking to make sure that everything's going okay. Right. We will like to check in more regularly to know what's going, plans and what are the issues.
Right.
But the very minimum would be every 48 hours.
Okay.
So the building's design also lends itself for staff to be able to check in with people because there's only one point of entry. So everybody would be coming in that main door where there would be a desk with a reception area and staff there, and plus the meal program, it's got multiple seatings, so people will be coming down to get their breakfast and their hot meal every day. So other opportunities that allow staff to interact with the tenants.
And what we also find is other tenants, if someone's not doing well, another tenant will tell us, you should check on so-and-so, because we don't know if they're doing well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, when the modular is built and full, will all the other low barrier be closed, asks John.
Well, I think what we will do is that when the Burnett site opens, I mean, it's not a case of just opening and closing. I think what we want to do then is see what the need is in Maple Ridge. Supportive housing with the community, our response is not on a per capita basis, it's on about need in that particular community. So as I said, we know that at the moment, there's up to 100 people every night in a shelter bed at the moment in the city of Maple Ridge. So what we will do is work closely with the city and our community partners to monitor the impact. And in 2020, there's going to be another homeless count as well. But I think it's really important to say there's a range of factors we look at, when it's about supportive housing. It's not just on a per capita basis. It's about what is happening in that particular community. And I also, I hear this issue about, and I understand it, around the issue about that, Maple Ridge is doing enough and it's doing more. I think it's important to see what is happening in Maple Ridge across the Metro Vancouver area, though, as well. So Maple Ridge, unfortunately, is not the only community who's having to address these significant challenges around homelessness. We see it in Langley, we see it in Surrey, we see it throughout the Fraser Valley. So it's important that we respond to homelessness at a community level, but also at a regional level across the Metro Van area.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Kay asking, will the building on Burnett be under the Residential Tenancy Act or with program agreements?
Our intention is to have through the RTA, residential tenancy agreements, so that we do believe there's a good dispute mechanism. It's a kind of a gray area in terms of operating, but we find the RTA is something we can work within. Tenants know their rights. They also know their responsibilities. And so we are working, we'll work with tenants to have it very clear. Again, the RTA plus the crime-free addendum to the RTA.
Okay, great. Thank you. What would be required for tenants to be evicted?
Could be non-payment of rent.
Yeah. Yep.
If you look at it yourself as a tenant, you look at all that. We probably have in supported housing throughout a bit wider door in terms of we actually encourage people who would not be housed elsewhere because of their behaviors or other things to come inside, but there's still bottom lines and responsibilities. If they're a threat to other clients, other tenants, if they're a threat to staff, if they're violence, those would be non-starters. Again, the criminal activity would be an area that would quickly get someone to be evicted. Very little else after that. There may be people who we deem who have very profound mental illness or something that we're not the right facility for them. They need more support. They need a specialized resource. That's when we talk to Dan and his team and say, is there a residential treatment or care facility for this person who may need a different level of support than they would get in a supported housing site.
So not so much an eviction as just an adjustment.
And even when we do evictions, and we don't do a lot, but we do across our organization because we house 1,250 people. So we do it from time to time. We try to make sure that they're not evicted, no one's evicted to the street, that they actually have a place to go. It may be a shelter, it may be a rent supplement place, it may be something with a different level of support that's available.
Okay, great, thank you. Kay's asking, I noted that Mr. Flanagan referenced the City of Maple Ridge as being able to answer a question that was asked. Would a rep from the city be able to sit in on any future Q&A sessions?
Absolutely. I mean, when we're talking about addressing homelessness, it's through a partnership approach. And the municipalities have a real strong role to play in that. And we would welcome a rep from the City of Maple Ridge to be part of a future panel like this. Yeah.
Thank you. What is the timeline from being built to doors open for residents, asks Rosina.
So we're already on site right now. We're doing some excavation on the site. We've moved the trailer over there. And so we intend to be ready in the fall, so probably October. And so typically what we like to do is provide the operator with a couple of weeks as a minimum to be able to train on the site, to be able to clean it, to be able to prepare for residents to move in. So our expectation is that residents, in partnership with Coast Mental Health, that we would talk with them about moving people in by the end of October.
Great, okay, thank you. Next question asks, does the mayor and residents who say our city, our choice actually have a choice to decline, hold up, or change this housing project?
So from a provincial BC Housing perspective, this project is going ahead. And the project is going ahead because of the urgent need in the city of Maple Ridge. Because there are people, as of tonight, who, as I say, are sleeping either in a tent, in a doorway, or in a shelter. And it's really important that those folks are brought inside as quickly as possible. We also, though, want dialogue with the city of Maple Ridge and with the community of Maple Ridge. It's, this is a topic around homelessness. It can be a topic which can act as a lightning rod for a range of issues. I understand issues around safety because we all want to feel safe in our community and on the streets where we live. So it's really important that we do have dialogue with the city of Maple Ridge and with the community.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we've come to the end of our questions, and I thank you, all of you, for participating, and thank you as well to the folks from the community who sent your questions in. Don't forget, though, that you can continue to send in those questions, and they will be answered tomorrow and in the days to come at letstalkhousingbc.ca/Maple Ridge, where we can continue that discussion online. BC Housing will also be hosting a series of community information sessions in May, and dates will be announced online for those as well. So keep checking back on this site for details. Before we close, I'll ask everyone to just go around and maybe make a final comment on this evening's discussions, and then we'll bid everyone a farewell.
We're actually looking forward to actually housing the 51 people. We think will make a monumental change to the streetscape of Maple Ridge. Yeah, I think people are fed up of having tent cities for 5 years or longer. And this is a chance to actually hopefully end that and actually get the housing support system balanced.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Do come out to the information sessions. If you feel that your question, you haven't had a chance to ask a question, or your question, you've got more questions after this process, please do email us and go online, and we'll still respond in that way as well. Thank you.
I think it's really important that we all have the chance to talk about the new site and housing and homelessness issues in Maple Ridge. So I'm really pleased to have been a part of this conversation, and I hope that the conversation continues productively.
Thank you very much for participating this evening. It's always great to be able to answer directly community members and what their questions are. And I just wanted to reiterate that my role at BC Housing is to develop new housing, the new supply of housing, and I look forward to ongoing discussions about future housing projects in your community and addressing the needs of other continuum of housing that might not be part of this project. Thanks.
And I just wanted to add that I think homelessness is a complex issue, and I think partnerships like we see here, I think really are a great way to work towards tackling that. And I think we all have a part to play on that, and I think we certainly from Fraser Health and working with BC Housing on a number of other initiatives, so we've had great success. So I don't see this as being any different. So.
Thank you very much. And thank you again for your time and your attention and your questions. And we hope to see you out at some of the community information sessions coming up in May. Thanks.